Making another quilt using the Bear Paw pattern. I always like scrappy quilts, using what I have at hand and making a good quilt that is pleasing to look at. This one, the color combination, I really like browns and light blues, dark blues. I think that's a very nice quilt. When I'm starting a quilt, I look at the batting that I have, and I get a lot of batting strips from long arm quilters. And I sort them in my cupboard by the width of the strips. So I have a bundle that is, 10 inches, 9 inches, 10 inches to 13 inches wide, and usually they're the length of the quilt. I have other, and there are a variety of different quilt batting types as well. Some of them are more polycotton, some of them are bamboo. There's all kinds of them. I have to be careful what I pick out. This particular roll was 6 to 9 inches wide. And I have to be careful when I'm picking these things out so that they are similar weight and density. But I join them together. And then I look at what I want to use for the front of the quilt. And here I chose squares from my cut square bins, 2.5 inch size and 3 inch size. The 2.5s are going to make the 9 patch of the bear paw, and the 3 inches ones are going to make the corners, the half square triangles for the two sides. And that's a straightforward quilting technique, making half square triangles. I always do a couple of sample blocks before I decide how big the block is going to be. And when I made my two samples, one blue and one brown, I thought I need to make it a bit wider because I want a block that is going to be about 20 inches. Then I made the backings out of pieces of fat quarters, and I joined them together so that they made a pleasing pattern. So my bear paw blocks had a border around them, and I was going to add a 2 inch strip of fabric around the bear paw to give it a bit of color and get it the size I wanted. And everything worked out very well for that. Well, I'm almost to the point where I'm going to start joining these blocks together. All 12 of the blocks are almost done. They're almost all quilted. I have a couple more blue ones to do because you see on this one, I am putting a border around the outside of all of the blocks before I join them together with quilt as you go method. So in order to do that, I first of all have to quilt the block, then I add the strip around the outside. And I'll just show you what I'm doing there. I'll get one off the wall and quilt it. So the first thing I usually do is just to make sure that everything is straight and flat on this piece on the front and the back, because it's been hanging around for a while. I give it a press on the back side before I quilt it, making sure that everything on the back side is flat. And secondly, I always find that by pressing it a little bit, the loftiness of the batting flattens out a little bit, and it's easier for me to machine quilt. On the front side, I give it a nice little press to make sure that the seams aren't going to be a problem and that it lies flat. Because I really don't put too many pins in, I want to make sure that everything is straight and secured. And I think also the pressing it helps to adhere it to the batting a little bit. I think I don't ever use spray adhesives. I don't like the aerosol components of those things. So I'm just you know, giving it a nice little bit of a, and it warms it up too. So it's kind of nice. And then most of the time I just take the pins right out. See, I've only got 4 pins in the corner, 1 up there. I put that one there so I know where the top is, because sometimes the backs, I have them sorted so that I know where I want them on the wall. I don't want to swap places and have a different pattern on the back, because quite often I organize the back before I organize the front. So there, that's pressed, nice and flat. I'll take it over to my sewing machine. So this time I am doing a free motion stitch. Sometimes, most of the time, I like to do straight lines, but this time I'm doing a free motion. So on the sewing machine, I have my free motion. I don't know if you can see it at all. I have the free motion foot. And usually I start, well, at the side. I usually start at the side, but because I'm going to put that border around the outside, I'm starting at the corner here. It will be fun. One of the things about doing free motion, I always like to have things on the back that have pattern all over. And that way you don't see the free motion stitching so much on the back side. I also make sure that I have thread on the back that really you're not going to see it when it's done. You just see the indentation or the loft changing slightly of the quilt, but you don't really see the thread. I'm not interested in making patterns with quilting. All those lines and scallops and things. I'm not really interested in seeing all those lines. I made a couple of quilts and I used contrasting thread, and the thread stood out, and the pattern of the quilting pattern didn't really show up so much, and I didn't like it. So I've never really continued to do that. I like to have my backing kind of plain, not part of the design as such. In the quilting, that's what I mean. So normally I hold the top thread, and with my right hand I turn the hand wheel once to get the bottom thread up to the top. And when I have the 2 threads in my fingers, and the presser foot is down, you see the presser foot is down, but the foot is above the surface of the quilt, which is what it should be. And I also change my stitch length a little longer than the regular stitch length would be for sewing a seam. So here I just make a couple of stitches in one spot, and then I make sure that the needle down position is on, And I can cut these two threads, the bottom and the top thread, put them in my garbage down here. There we go. And now I'm ready to go. Now, with something this small, I'm not worried about wearing gloves to hold it and move it because it slides around on the sewing machine table quite easily. And I just have this table extension. I'm not doing a big, huge amount at one time. The only rule I have with doing free motion stitching is I want to go in a pattern that sort of goes one direction and then you go other direction and then you go another direction. And I don't want to cross stitching lines at any time. So I have to be able to see where my stitching has been completed. And to do that, I have to be looking at it from the face on. I can turn the piece of quilting from one side to another. So when I'm moving it, it moves quite easily. You'll see what I mean. So I'm going to make sort of motions with my shoulders and work it around. So up in one direction, another direction, another direction. I don't have to come over the edge because I'm going to put that border around the edge, and that will hold all the edges securely. Continue. When I come where there's a pin, I stop in advance and I undo the pin and take it out. I want to get into the corner without any problem. So you really can't see it on the back side because the fabric is very patterned and the thread matches very well. So I just continue on. If you keep a consistent speed, make sure that the tension of your machine is set up properly so that you don't have missing stitches because you're going too fast. It's just a slow and easy pattern. Here I am at the next corner. I'm going to take the pin out. Just turn the direction around. I sort of go around the outside, then I come and fill in the center part, and then I'll finish this other side and end up over here probably. It's just a small see where I'm going. Take the pin out here while I'm stopped. And that's it. Easy peasy. So now I'll just sew that border around the outside. I'm really a lucky girl because I have 2 sewing machines and I have a lovely space to work in. Ever since I moved my sewing into this room, I've enjoyed organizing the space and making it more user-friendly. As I get older, I need to have chair and tabletop and foot control all positioned so that it makes it better for my back and my hands because of arthritis and osteoporosis. So I've taken some time to make the chair that I sit in at the proper height for my arms and legs, and the back, my back to be straight. So before I used to hunch over, and now I'm attempting to keep my arms straight at the front and my shoulders a little bit more level, and the foot control on the floor I made a little device out of some scrap wood so that this part doesn't, it hooks over the edge of the table foot, and this part is a piece of foam core, and it keeps the control foot on the floor at a height that's just slightly, an inch higher than the floor would be. So my hips are in more of a 90-degree angle, and with this little device, the foot control doesn't slide away from me under the table, and my leg isn't extended way out front. It's at a nice angle, and it's keeping my body in alignment a lot more than it used to. I was on a wooden floor before. Now I've got a carpet, but the foot control still was sliding away, so I just made this little device out of this scrap wood to keep it in place, and it's working out quite well. I can sit in the chair and I don't have to worry about trying to find the controller on the floor, and it seems to be nice. So what I'm doing for along the side of this, I said I'm putting a border around the outside. I've just cut 2-inch strips. They are going to just sew down around the outside. And I have this other foot. It's a walking foot on this machine. And I am using straight lines to sew this border along the side. So once again, I'm just starting at the corner here, in here. I lift up the presser foot and place it down. And once again, I just bring the thread from the bobbin up to the top, so it doesn't get tangled underneath. And when I start, give it a little back stitch, because remember, the backing is very patterned, so it's not going to show a lot of stitching. It's very good at camouflage. So now the edge of the strip I'm putting is straight, and I can use that as a guide to sew this down the side. I just hold it at the top and the bottom. And stitch it. When I'm getting to the bottom, I just cut this piece off at the end. For the next piece, I just turn this around. I press that up with my fingers. Take another strip. Only this time I'm going to start at the edge. Side 3. And side 4. And this one is going to go all the way to the side. I'll just give it a bit of a press and trim. So once I have it pressed out like that, the next thing I'm going to do is just put a row of top stitching or top quilting on here with my walking foot. And that's part of the design. I don't like to start right in the corner, and I use my walking foot as a guide so I know how far away from the seam I want to keep this row of stitching. Bring the bottom thread up to the top. There it is. Do a little back stitch. And I'm just going to stitch around my block. Needle down. So it's sewn around the edges. Now the last thing I need to do with this before I can quilt as you go and do the joining of the blocks, I'm going to trim it a little bit to make the outer edge even. So when I started making this, I was quite confident that my 4 2.5-inch blocks would add up to an 8 1/2-inch square. But instead of just joining the squares together, I added this row in between, which was 1.5 inches, so it gave me an extra inch. So the size of the block from here to here is about 17.5 inches. So the reason why I'm adding this extra piece is to make the block a bit bigger even still. I like to have quilts that are at least a bed size. I don't make many wall hangings and items like that. I like to make bed size quilts because I'm using my scraps and I donate them. So when I did my first block, before I even thought about the quilting, I wanted to make a block that was at least 20 inches across. And this one I'm making 21.5 inches, so when it's finished it'll be at least 20 inches, and my quilt with 3 blocks across is going to be at least 60 inches wide, which is good for a youth bed size. And so that's why I did this extra border. And it's easy enough to plan ahead and make some decisions before you start as to the size of the piece of backing that you use. I must say, you can add, when you do this quilt as you go, you can add strips around the outside. But if I'm trying to make it easy for myself, I try to make the backing in the piece size that I want it when it's done. So these strips that I added here are 2 inches, and that gives me enough leeway that I can straighten this block out. So the first thing I want to do is measure from the outside of the block proper over, and I am measuring that in this case at 1 3/4 inches. And I'm going to trim that off straight along the edge. Now this edge, I use my table ruler, my cutting board, and I put that edge of the quilt onto the straight edge of the 1-inch mark. And I cut this other side at the same distance, 1 3/4. Now I have a good corner here, and I put that along the 1-inch mark and this along the 0 line. And I want my quilt to be 20 1/2 inches here, so I can now use the markings on the ruler on the board and trim that side. And I turn it one more time, and I trim this one at 20 1/2. So whatever you decide to do in the beginning, you do a little bit of planning and mathematics to make it work out to the size you want. And then use the appropriate pieces so that you have a little bit, like I don't have a lot of trimming off the edges. There's a little bit of trimming off the edges, not too much. I don't want to be too wasteful, but I also want to make a good product when I'm done. So this one is quilted. Both sides look pretty good, nice and flat, nothing untoward needing to be fixed. And I'll finish the last couple and then I'll start joining the blocks together. I always like to see the progress on my wall. So I place a number of blocks up at a time, finish them one by one, then I join them together. I like to do the quilt as you go process and finish it all, turn it around, and voila, there it is. It's all done. Just binding around the outside edge. If you want a refresher on Quilt as you go, I've made several other videos about the process of quilt as you go. I hope you enjoyed this video. I loved making this quilt. It was a fun project to make, and it certainly uses up some of the variety of scrap fabrics and scrap things that I have around my sewing room. And it really isn't a very difficult project at all. Straight line stitching, chain piecing the blocks, a bit of accurate measuring, nice and fun free motion stitching. I like doing that, and it was a fun project to do. And then just quilt as you go and binding. It's done, and I really am going to enjoy donating this quilt to the Youth Haven group in our city. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. I had a lot of fun. See you next time.